My son stood in my kitchen with his wife and their 3 kids and said, "We're staying with you all summer." He didn't ask. He told me, like it was already decided. Like I had no say in my own house. His wife leaned against the counter and smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile that says she knows something you don't. I looked at my son. I looked at her. I said, "Okay." 2 weeks later, I sold the house. Every square foot. Every memory. On. And I didn't tell him until the moving trucks showed up. But that's not where this story starts. That's not even close. It starts 18 years ago at my wedding. A day that was supposed to be mine but was stolen before I even walked down the aisle. Her name was Diane. Sharp jaw. Cold eyes. The kind of woman who walks into a room and you feel smaller. Not because she's tall. Because she calculates everything. Every word you say. Every move you make. She files it away. And you don't realize it until she uses it against you 3 years later. I thought I loved her. I really did. But love and fear look the same when you're 26 and desperate to feel chosen. The wedding was at her mother's estate. Her family had money. Real money. The kind that makes people whisper when you walk in. My family showed up in one rented car. My mother wore a dress she'd worn to my cousin's wedding 4 years earlier. My sister Maria sat in the back row with her then-husband Frank. I should have seen it during the vows. Diane's mother, Catherine, had rewritten them. I didn't know until I was standing there holding hands with a woman I barely knew. The officiant read words that Diane had picked. Words about obedience. About respect for the family that was taking me in. About understanding my place. My place. I looked at Diane. She didn't blink. She just nodded slightly at the officiant, like everything was fine. My mother shifted in her seat. My sister grabbed Frank's arm. I said I do. At the reception, Catherine stood up and made a toast. She said she was grateful that her daughter had found someone who would finally be useful. The room laughed. My family didn't. My father stared at his plate. He was already sick then. We just didn't know it yet. That night, Diane and I drove to a hotel she'd booked. Not me. Her. She'd planned everything. The room. The route. The timeline for when we'd have kids. She told me all of this in the dark while I stared at the ceiling. She said, "We'll try for a baby in 8 months. Boy first, then a girl. My mother already has names picked." I didn't say anything. She said, "You're quiet. That's good. Quiet men make good husbands." I should have left. But I didn't. 3 months into the marriage, I found out what Catherine was really like. She had a key to our apartment. She walked in whenever she wanted. She rearranged the furniture. She threw out my mother's photo from the living room and replaced it with a painting of Diane at age 12. When I confronted Diane about it, she said, "My mother has taste. Your family has opinions. There's a difference." I called my mother that night. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father says to make it work. Family is everything." My father, the man who never once stood up to anyone in his life. And he was telling me to survive. So I survived. But something was happening on the other side of my family that I didn't see. Not yet. My sister Maria's marriage to Frank was falling apart. Not slowly. Violently. Frank had lost his job 6 months after our wedding. He started drinking. Then he started hitting. Maria called me once at 2 in the morning, crying so hard I couldn't understand her. She said Frank had thrown her against the kitchen wall because the dinner was cold. I told Diane I needed to go help my sister. Diane looked at me and said, "If you go over there tonight, don't come back." I stayed. I've never forgiven myself for that. Maria never brought it up again. She stopped calling. When I saw her at Christmas, she had a bruise on her wrist covered with a bracelet. She saw me looking at it. She pulled her sleeve down and changed the subject. I asked my mother about it later. My mother said, "Maria made her bed. Frank comes from a good family. She just needs to be a better wife." That was my mother. That was my family. That was the poison I was raised in. Meanwhile, Diane got pregnant. Exactly 8 months in. Just like she planned. It was a boy. We named him Andrew. Catherine was in the delivery room. I was not. Diane said her mother had more experience with these things. I stood in the hallway, and heard my son cry for the first time through a closed door. Andrew grew up watching his grandmother control his mother, who controlled me. He learned early that I was the quiet one, the weak one, the one who didn't fight back. By the time he was 10, he was already mimicking Catherine. He'd say things like, "Dad, why don't you just do what Mom says? It's easier." And he was right. It was easier. That was the trap. Around this time, I started finding Diane's phone in weird places. Not weird, like under the couch. Weird, like she'd leave it face down on the nightstand, and if I walked near it, she'd casually pick it up and take it to the bathroom. One night she fell asleep before me. The phone was on the charger in the bathroom. I picked it up. There were dozens of messages to a number I didn't recognize. The messages were short, clinical, like instructions. Tell him the house needs a new roof. He'll agree to the loan. Don't let his family visit for Thanksgiving. Make it about Andrew. Start talking about private school. Plant the seed this month. The messages were signed with one initial, M. I didn't know who M was, but I knew those weren't love messages. They were strategy. Someone was coaching my wife on how to dismantle me piece by piece. I put the phone back. I didn't confront her. I was still too weak. Still too afraid. Still the quiet man who makes a good husband. But something shifted that night. Something small and dangerous. I started paying attention. Over the next 2 years I watched. I listened. I collected. Every lie. Every manipulation. Every time Catherine changed the locks, or Diane moved money, or Andrew was coached to say something cruel. I wrote it down. Dates, times, exact words. I also started digging into M. It took me a year to figure it out. M was a man named Martin. He was Catherine's brother, Diane's uncle. He lived in another state. He was a divorce attorney who specialized in high asset separations. And he had been guiding my wife through my marriage since before the wedding. He wrote the vows. He planned the timeline. He was the one who told Diane to get pregnant at 8 months. This wasn't a marriage. It was a construction project. I was the building material. But here's where it gets worse. During my digging, I found something else. Something about my own family that broke me. My father wasn't just sick. He had been sick for years. My mother knew. She hid it. She hid it because the treatment would have drained the savings they'd been saving for Andrew's college fund. My parents had promised Diane they'd contribute to Andrew's education. My mother chose that promise over my father's health. My father died 6 months after I found out. He died thinking I had a good marriage. He died because my mother was more afraid of Catherine than she was of losing her husband. I didn't cry at the funeral. I couldn't. I was too full of something that wasn't grief. It was clarity. Now let me fast forward. Andrew is 17. He's been raised by Catherine. He has her eyes. Cold. Calculating. He got a girlfriend named Kristen who is exactly like Diane was at that age. Pretty. Late. Little. Diane and I haven't slept in the same room in 4 years. We live in the same house like 2 countries at war. Silent borders. Occasional bombings. One night, Andrew comes home from Catherine's house and sits at the dinner table. Diane made dinner. I wasn't hungry. Andrew looked at me and said, "Grandma says you should sign the house over to me and Mom. For tax purposes." He was 17. He didn't know what tax purposes meant. He was just delivering a message. I looked at Diane. She was stirring her soup. Not eating. Just stirring. Waiting. I said, "No." Andrew blinked. In his entire life, he had never heard me say no to anything Diane or Catherine wanted. Diane stopped stirring. She looked at me. For the first time in years, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't control. It was surprise, maybe even fear. I said, "This house is in my name. It has always been in my name. It will stay in my name." I walked out of the kitchen. My hands were shaking. But I said no. That night, Diane called Catherine. I could hear her through the wall. She was whispering, but Diane doesn't know how to whisper. She thinks she does, but she doesn't. Catherine said something. Then Diane said, "He's changing. I don't know what happened." Catherine said, "Find out and fix it." I smiled in the dark. For the first time in 18 years, I smiled in that house. Over the next few months, things escalated. Catherine started showing up unannounced. She'd inspect the house like a property manager. She'd make comments about the paint, the lawn, the car I drove. She was trying to reassert dominance. One Saturday she walked in and found me sitting in the living room with papers spread across the coffee table. She asked what I was doing. I said, "Financial planning." She picked up one of the papers. It was a printout of every dollar Diane had moved from our joint account over the past 10 years. Over $200,000. Moved in small amounts. Never enough to trigger a warning. Catherine's face went white. Not because she was shocked. Because she knew I knew. She put the paper down. She looked at me with those cold eyes and said, "You've been busy." I said, "I've been quiet. There's a difference." She left. An hour later, Diane came home from shopping and went straight to Catherine's house. They talked for 4 hours. I know, because I drove past and saw every light on. The next day, Diane served me tea. She never made me tea. She put it in front of me and sat down and said, "I think we should go to counseling." Counseling. The one thing she'd always refused. Now, she wanted it. Because Catherine told her to. Because they needed to figure out what I knew and how to manage it. I said, "Sure." We went to a therapist. A woman Catherine had picked, of course. Diane talked for 50 minutes about how I was distant, how I didn't engage, how she felt unloved. She cried, real tears. Diane can cry on command. It's the most terrifying thing about her. The therapist looked at me and said, "How do you feel about what your wife is saying?" I said, "I feel like she's performing." Diane stopped crying. The therapist wrote something down. Diane looked at me like she wanted to kill me. But she also looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. We never went back to therapy. Now let me tell you about my sister Maria, because this is where the two families collide. Maria finally left Frank. After 12 years of abuse, she walked out with a garbage bag of clothes and a broken rib. She came to my house. Diane wasn't home. Maria sat on my couch and told me everything. The hitting, the control, the money he hid, how her son Marcus had started wetting the bed at age 9 because of the screaming. She said, "I should have left years ago, but Mom said to make it work, just like she told you." I held my sister's hand and I said, "I'm sorry I didn't come that night." Maria said, "I know." Diane came home and saw Maria on the couch. She didn't say a word. She went upstairs. An hour later, Catherine called. She said Maria couldn't stay. She said abused women bring drama. She said if Maria stayed, I needed to understand there would be consequences. I said, "My sister stays." Catherine said, "Then you're choosing your family over ours." I said, "I've been choosing yours for 18 years. Watch what happens when I stop." I hung up. Maria stayed for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, Diane didn't speak to me. Not once. She communicated through Andrew. She'd tell Andrew to tell me dinner was ready. She'd tell Andrew to tell me to take out the trash. She turned my own son into a messenger service. Andrew didn't understand why. He just did what his mother asked. He'd been trained to. One night, Maria and I were sitting on the back porch. She was healing. Slowly. She told me she'd filed for divorce. She told me Frank had threatened to take Marcus. She told me she had nothing. I said, "I have something for you." I went inside and came back with a check. It was from an account Diane didn't know about. I'd been saving for 3 years. Every bonus. Every side job. Every dollar I could hide. It wasn't much. $12,000. Maria looked at the check and started crying. She said, "You can't. Diane will." I said, "Diane doesn't control what I give to my sister." Maria took the check. She hugged me. And for the first time since we were kids, I felt like I had a real family member again. The next morning the check was gone from Maria's purse. Diane had taken it. I found it shredded in the bathroom trash. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I went to my home office. I closed the door. And I made a phone call. I called Martin. Yes, that Martin. Catherine's brother. The architect of my marriage. He answered on the second ring. He didn't say hello. He said, This is unexpected. I said, I know who you are, I know what you've done, and I know about the money Diane has been moving. Silence. Long silence. Then Martin said, What do you want? I said, I want to know why. Another silence. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, Because Catherine asked me to, and I owed her. And when you owe Catherine, you pay, or you disappear. I asked, What did you owe her for? Martin said, That's not my story to tell. And he hung up. But that call did something. It cracked something open, because Martin sounded scared. Not of me. Of Catherine, his own sister. I started looking into Catherine's past, not the version she showed the world. The real one. The one buried under money and power and a perfectly maintained estate. What I found took me 6 months. Catherine's first husband didn't leave her. He didn't run off with another woman like the family story went. He disappeared, literally. No body, no record, just gone. And before he disappeared, he had been trying to leave Catherine. He'd hired a lawyer. That lawyer was Martin. Martin had been helping Catherine's first husband escape the marriage. Catherine found out. She made Martin a deal. Help me destroy the next man I marry, or I'll make sure you lose everything. Martin had been trapped for 30 years. Just like me. Just like my father. Just like Maria. The family secret wasn't about money. It was about a woman who destroyed everyone around her and called it love. Now, here's where I need to tell you about the house. The house I live in. The one Andrew thinks he's inheriting. I bought it before I met Diane. With money I saved from 3 jobs in my early 20s. It was never marital property in the legal sense. Diane's name was never on the deed. She never noticed because she was too busy moving money out of our joint accounts to pay attention to what I actually owned. For 18 years she treated that house like hers. Catherine treated it like hers. Andrew grew up believing it would be his. But it was mine. Only mine. And when Andrew stood in my kitchen 3 months ago and said, We're staying with you all summer, I knew what was really happening. Diane had sent him. Catherine had sent him. They wanted to establish residency. They wanted to build a case that the house was a family home. They wanted to lay the groundwork for a legal claim. Andrew stood there with his wife Kristen and his 3 kids, and he said it like a king claiming a throne. I said, Okay, come on Friday. He came on Friday. With bags. With furniture. With an attitude that said this was his house now. On Saturday morning, I left early. I told him I was running errands. I drove to a real estate office. I met a woman named Patricia. I'd been talking to Patricia for 2 months. She already had a buyer. Cash offer. $200,000 over market value. The buyer didn't care about inspection. They wanted the house, and they wanted it closed in 30 days. I signed the papers that morning. On Monday, the sold sign went up in the front yard. Andrew called me screaming. He said, What did you do? You can't sell this house. This is my house. I said, No, it's my house. It was always my house, and now it's someone else's house. He called Diane. Diane called Catherine. Catherine called Martin. Martin called me. Martin said, You're making a mistake. I said, No. I'm finishing what you started, but we're too afraid to finish. He was quiet. Then he said, Catherine is going to destroy you. I said, Let her try. Diane came to the house that night. She was calm. Too calm. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, You think selling this house hurts me? This house is nothing. It's wood and nails. I have been taking your money for 18 years. I have accounts you will never find. I have been planning for this since before we married. You think you're the first husband Catherine has broken? You're just the latest. She leaned forward and said, I will take you to court. I will drag your name through every mud puddle in this state. I will tell them you were abusive, that you were controlling, that you isolated me from my family. I have documentation, forged but convincing. By the time I'm done, you won't have a penny or a reputation. I sat there, and I listened. And when she was done, I said, Are you finished? She stared at me. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. I slid it across the table. I said, Open it. She opened it. Inside were printouts of every message between her and Martin. Every financial transfer. Every lie. And at the bottom was a USB drive. I said, "That drive contains a video. Martin recorded it 3 years ago. He was drunk and he confessed everything. The plan, the money. Catherine's first husband. All of it." Diane's hand was shaking. For the first time in 18 years, Diane's hand was shaking. I said, "I didn't sell this house to hurt you. I sold it because it was never yours. And I'm not the weak man you married anymore. I'm the man you created, and that should terrify you." Diane didn't say another word. She left. 2 weeks later, I was served with divorce papers. Diane was asking for everything: the house, which was already sold, the money, which was already protected, custody arrangements for Andrew, who was a grown adult. It was nonsense. It was desperation. But then something happened that I didn't expect. Catherine showed up at my apartment. All in. No Diane. No lawyers. She sat down across from me, and for the first time I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Exhaustion. She said, "My first husband's name was Daniel. He didn't leave me. I made everyone believe he left. Martin helped me bury the story, not the body. There was no body. Daniel just ran. He ran and he never came back, and I've been angry for 30 years because he was the only man who ever saw what I really was, and he chose to run instead of fight." I didn't say anything. She said, "I destroyed your marriage because destroying men is the only thing that makes me feel like I won. Daniel made me feel small, so I've been making every man since him feel smaller." She paused. Then she said, "My daughter is exactly like me, and I made her that way, and your son is going to be exactly like her, unless someone stops it." I said, "Is that why you're here? To ask me to stop it?" Catherine looked at me. Her eyes were wet. She said, "I'm here to tell you that Martin is going to testify against Diane in the divorce. He's turning over everything, the messages, the accounts, the plan. He's done being afraid of me." I said, "What changed?" She said, "I told him to stop being afraid, because I'm tired of being the thing people are afraid of." I didn't believe her. Not fully. But it didn't matter, because the evidence was real. The court date was last Tuesday. I walked in with my lawyer. Diane walked in with hers. Andrew sat in the back row with Kristen. He wouldn't look at me. Martin walked in. He sat down next to my lawyer. Diane saw him, and her face went gray. Martin testified for 2 hours. He laid out everything. The 18-year plan. The money. The manipulation. The coaching. He showed the messages. He explained the strategy. He told the court that Diane had never loved me. That the marriage was a financial construction from day one. Diane's lawyer tried to discredit him. But Martin had documents, bank records, timestamps. He had built a case against his own niece because he said, "I helped build the cage. It's time I helped open it." The judge ruled in my favor. Completely. Diane got nothing from me. The money she'd stolen was ordered to be returned. The fraudulent accounts were frozen. Diane sat in that courtroom, and for the first time in her life she had nothing. No control. No money. No plan. Her mother sat 2 rows behind her and didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. After the hearing, Andrew approached me in the parking lot. He said, "You ruined Mom. You ruined Grandma. You ruined everything." I said, "No. They ruined themselves. I just stopped helping them." He said, "I'll never forgive you." I said, "I know, but I need you to hear something. Your mother was coached to marry me. Your grandmother orchestrated it. Your whole life you've been a piece in someone else's game. You can keep playing or you can walk away." He stared at me. His jaw was tight. His eyes were Catherine's eyes. But for 1 second, just 1 second, I saw something else in them. Something that might have been my son underneath all of it. He got in his car and drove away. Now here's the part I haven't told anyone. The part that still keeps me up at night. 3 days after the court hearing, I got a letter. No return address. Handwritten. The handwriting was shaky. Old. It said, "Daniel didn't run. Catherine's first husband didn't run. I know because I'm Daniel. I've been alive this whole time. Living under a different name in a different state. Martin found me last year. He told me what Catherine did to you. He told me about your son. He said your son looks like me. I need to know if that's true. Because if it is, then Catherine didn't just destroy your marriage. She replaced me with my own bloodline and called it a new beginning. I read that letter 7 times. I looked at a photo of Andrew. Then I found a photo of Daniel that Martin had included in the evidence files. A photo from 30 years ago. Andrew has Daniel's jaw, Daniel's eyes, Daniel's hands. My son. The boy I raised. The boy who hates me. The boy who was engineered to be Catherine's weapon. He might not be my son at all. I'm sitting in an empty apartment now. The house is sold. The marriage is over. The family I built was built on a lie that was built on another lie that was built on a dead man who isn't dead. And somewhere out there, a man named Daniel is waiting for me to call him. I haven't called yet, because I'm not sure I want to know the answer. And because if Andrew isn't mine, then the only thing I have left from 18 years of survival is the one thing Catherine can never take from me. The quiet. I'm not weak anymore, but the man I've become is someone I don't recognize. And the family I thought I had never existed. That's the thing about houses. You can sell them. You can walk away. But the ghosts stay. They always stay. I'm going to call Daniel tomorrow. Or maybe next week. Or maybe never. Because some truths don't set you free. Some truths just build a smaller cage.